Jack McCullough is joining us today for a keynote. Jack is recognized as a thought leader in the field of finance leadership, with a career that has included CFO positions at 26 companies. He founded and is the president of the CFO Leadership Council, global organization dedicated to empowering senior financial executives through innovative professional development programs and peer networking. Jack recently published his first book, Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, which is based on conversations with more than 40 of the world's elite chief financial officers, from Silicon Valley startups to Fortune 50 multinationals. He is a senior contributor at Forbes.com, where he writes a bi-monthly article for the Forbes Financial Network. So welcome to Jack, and we'll let you take it away.
Okay, terrific, thanks. By the way, just a little tidbit, one of those 40-something CFOs whom I interviewed was John Rex, who just spoke a moment ago. So thank you, everybody, great to be here. I am going to bring up my presentation, which is not visible. Let me try that again. There we go. Okay, hopefully that works for everybody. Again, Jack McCullough. I am the president and founder of the CFO Leadership Council, and it's great to have you here. So with that said, let's begin. So I want to start off by giving an analogy. What can you learn from a 14th century Mason? And I want you, as you go through and progress through your career, I want you to think of this 14th century Masonic team. So first of all, to start off, there was a child who came up to a construction site, and he went to the most junior Mason on the team, and he said, "Excuse me, can you tell me what it is that you're doing here?" And he said, "Sure, I created some concrete, and I'm using that and applying it to the bricks to build a wall." And the boy said, "Oh, that's interesting. Thank you very much." But he wasn't really satisfied that that was what was going on. But that person was in the modern finance and accounting team is an accountant. He or she would simply be describing the job that they're doing. Went to a slightly more senior person and said, "Hey, I'm a little curious what you're doing." And he said, "Sure, I'm working with all of the other Masons, and we're building a wall, as you can see. So we're taking the bricks and putting them together and creating a wall." And that was really equivalent to an accounting manager, in the sense that the person was focused on the team, not on the, not on just the individual job that they were doing. This person was part of a team of bricklayers that were building a wall. Still not satisfied, the child went up to a more senior person and said, "What about you? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're doing?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm happy to. I'm working with all the architects and carpenters and plumbers and everything else, and we're building a hospital." And that person is roughly equivalent to a controller in a company, understands what the company's doing and the greater overall view of the job and why it's important. And then, still not completely satisfied, the child went up to the foreman on the job and said, "Excuse me, can you tell me what you're doing?" And the foreman said, "Yes, we're working together to stop the spread of the bubonic plague throughout Europe." And that person was focused on the mission of the company. He was considered to be the overall mission, not just the job, not just what the team's doing, not what the company's doing. And that's roughly equivalent to a CFO in the modern world. So as you progress through your career, think about the CFO and think about not the job that you're doing or the team or even the company, but what is the overall mission? And approach your job with that in mind. This is my background. We can skip this, not very interesting. but my contact information is in the upper left-hand corner if any of you want to reach out with me. And now we've got a polling question. Okay. Okay, it looks like over 90% of you have answered, so I'm going to move on. Getting a little stuck here, bear with me. So what are the secrets of Rockstar CFOs? So first of all, they think strategically, and we are going to discuss each of these one at a time. They provide ethical leadership, and those are probably the two most important in no particular order. They are master deal makers. They build elite teams. They learn continuously. They develop board relationships. They perform cross-functionally. They maintain financial expertise, and they achieve work-life balance. So let's talk about each of these one at a time. And you know, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat area, and we will cover them at the end. Okay, thinking strategically. The main thing, you want to think of yourself as a strategic partner to the CEO. Don't think of yourself as task-oriented, but think of yourself as a partner to the CEO, helping him or her really achieve and drive the financial objectives of the organization you work for. The other thing a lot of CFOs shared this with me is they felt they were the only one on the leadership team who was balancing the long-term strategy with the short-term needs. And this is particularly important if you're a public company, because if you have a bad quarter, Wall Street can punish your stock price. But you need to not mortgage the future. Yes, you want to make sure that you're making your quarterly earnings guidance, but at the same time, don't give up the future just to make one quarter. Balance the long term with the short term. It's imperative that you understand the missions, goals, and objectives of your organization. It's the critical thing. Think back to the CFO, the Mason, the most senior person. He or she would be the CFO in the modern world, understanding the mission of stopping the spread of the Black Death throughout Europe and the goals and objectives as well. And then there's an expression, CFGO. So be a CFGO, not a CFNO. The main difference is a CFGO is somebody who makes things happen, and a CFNO is a person who finds a reason to prevent things from happening. So think about that. Elite CFOs take an active, not a reactive approach to their role. And one thing, unless your boss happens to be a former CFO, as the CFO of a company, your financial expertise and strategic thinking is invaluable. It's important that you be involved in all of the strategic decision making. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about ethical leadership. And I think for CFOs and finance and accounting professionals generally, leading by example is great. Practice ethics every day in every way. But it's not just you yourself being ethical. It's really creating a culture of ethical responsibility where people understand that ethics is a real way of life, that ethics matter. Use ethics in all of your decision making. It's important stuff. It's not just buzzwords that you're saying to look good. And then, you know, what is ethics? Full and accurate disclosure of relevant information. If there's bad news, you share it immediately. Once it's fully understood, you don't hide things from stakeholders. and you do it fully, you do it accurately. There's no spinning of information. You do it in the most straightforward way that you possibly can. And then finally, as you're making ethical decisions, evaluate the needs of all of your constituents: stockholders, investors, clients, employees, suppliers, and depending upon what you do for a living, even society as a whole. So as a CFO, you're expected to be the most ethical person in the company, and you set the example for the entire organization. It's imperative that you just demonstrate unquestioned ethical standards in all of your decision making. Which I believe brings up our next polling question. Does your company have a code of ethics? Okay, it looks like 93% voted. And the good news is just about half of you believe that your company has a code of ethics and you're intimately familiar with it. So good on you. Normally, this is divided about evenly amongst the 4 options. So this is fantastic. And then master deal making. CFOs today are involved in every major transaction in the company from the beginning, not at the end. They're involved whether it be an IPO or an M&A, joint venture, OEM, capital raising. They are involved in all of those things. So, and the other thing, keep in mind, again, thinking of that Mason, understand the strategic and financial objectives of every deal that you're trying to do. Proactively identify risks and opportunities, not just negotiate final terms. When I was a CFO, and I haven't been for a while, my role was basically, I was brought in the end, sometimes I'd negotiate against my fellow CFO, and we would negotiate the final terms like, net 30 versus net 45, those sorts of things. It wasn't really the most exciting work in the world, it was important. But now CFOs are involved deeply with the whole deal-making process. And one CFO told me that she focused her objectives on creating opportunities, not solving problems. And she described that as a light going on when she made that realization that she should look at deal-making not just as pointing out what might go wrong or even solving might go wrong, but look proactively for opportunities to help grow her organization. She said that was a big game changer for her, and it turned her from just a very good CFO to an elite level CFO, I believe. So it's worth repeating here, be a CF go, not a CF no, yet remember that sometimes the best deal is the one that you avoid. So build elite teams. This has changed a little bit since I wrote the book, but we'll talk about it because it remains important even if the nuances have changed a little. So it's the single biggest challenge organizations face. In recent years, you couldn't pick up a newspaper without reading about the war for talent. Finding enough talented people to come and work for your organization has been mission impossible for companies. It's changed a little bit in COVID, but not completely. So, keep in mind, it's the most important thing. And why is that? Even smaller organizations are complex. There's far-flung operations. People are thinking globally from day one. There is the multi-generational workforce. Generation Z entered the workforce in 2018. And at the same time, baby boomers are not retiring on their historic schedule. So you've got 4, 5, depending on how you count, different generations in the workforce at the same time, which is historically unprecedented. And this one's no longer true. But until recently, the strong economy has created unprecedented opportunities for recent college graduates. Obviously, in the COVID world, that hasn't necessarily been the case. And HR reports into CFOs in about 2/3 of companies. So that means that the team focus is very, very important. You can't be insular and just working in the world of finance and accounting. And the main things that you're involved in as a CFO are recruit, retain, motivate, and lead. And one thing, one of the CFOs I spoke to was, it was interesting. He told me he worked at a Silicon Valley startup. It's a company that I guarantee everybody on this call has heard of and is probably used this week or will use this week. And they were just in a situation they could not hire quickly enough. So he said, let me do it. And what he did is he said, why don't you tell me what you need to hire? And they were trying to hire like 10 engineers. So what he did is he actually did 20 one-on-one lunches with the top candidates that they could find. He just sat down, explained why it would be a good career move to join the company, what the company's values were all about. And because the CFO was so trusted and sincere, he actually was able to close these, high-powered engineers at a time nobody else was able to. So it was fantastic that he was able to get involved in this outside the world of finance and accounting. So when you think building elite teams, don't think just finance and accounting, think enterprise-wide. And the most common advice that I got is build your team for where you want to go, not where you are today. So, I tell people, look for the team that you want to build 3 to 5 years from now, and look for the talent that you need to fill that team. Look for people who share your passion, who share your intellectual curiosity, who share your work ethic, and bring those people on the team. You might be over hiring in the short run, but in the long run, it's definitely the way to go. So build your team for 3 to 5 years out, not for today. And here's the newest polling question. I'm not sure how to do that. Okay, it is expanded on my view, so. Did that do it? Okay, thanks for putting up with that. I was informed that you didn't have the visibility that I hoped you did on that slide. So, okay, so hopefully we did the polling question. Number 5, learn continuously. And it probably shouldn't be surprising that CFOs are intellectually curious and always striving to learn and get better at their craft. So there are a lot of formal education programs available. You can earn an MBA or an MST or whatever it might be. There are a lot of live and online courses tailored to your business and industry. And peer networking is paramount. Just about every CFO I spoke to was part of a peer network. It didn't have to be a big one or a formal one. A lot of them were just in groups with 5 or 6 other CFOs. But the idea is that you're learning from people who are really good at their job, and you want to network from your peers. The other thing is, if you have a challenge that you're a little uncomfortable with in your job, you may not want to go to your boss and reveal that, right? So that may not be the best career move for yourself. So it's great to have a peer network. You can call and say, hey, I'm facing this. I'm not exactly sure what's involved in it. So can you help me out? They're invaluable. I would encourage you to develop a peer network. So find a mentor. There aren't very many people that I know who are successful that didn't have a mentor at some point in their career. So I would recommend go out and find a mentor if you can. It doesn't have to be a more experienced financial executive or whatever profession you're in. One CFO I spoke to, she was actually a controller for a very large consumer products company. And she told me her mentor was a VP of sales, not a CFO. And she wanted to get a CFO job within the same company. And I thought that was an interesting way to go about it. So I asked for an explanation on that. And she told me that there are a lot of people in the company that had the requisite finance and accounting skills to be good CFOs. But she felt that if she brought a customer-focused perspective to her business, that that would give her a competitive advantage and make her more successful in the CFO role. And she was right. She became a very successful CFO because she approached things a little bit more broader than if she had. So the point is, the mentor may not be somebody obvious. Think about people that are vested in your career, whom you respect, and that you can learn from, and that person could be a mentor. Technology is ever changing, and it's really easy to be a dinosaur before you turn 30. So, by all means, stay on the cutting edge of technology. I tell people, if you don't have a blockchain strategy for your company, develop one. A few people, well, it's probably not true now, but a year ago, a lot of people who I know, very accomplished CFOs, but they weren't even sure what blockchain is. AI, whatever the current technology might be, make sure you're on the cutting edge of that, because that's what really drives competitive advantage for your firm. So keep in mind, it's just impossible to remain on the cutting edge of your profession or industry within a cocoon. Challenge yourself to continuously improve your toolbox. So, and now we have another polling question. Okay, well, we are at about 90% again, and boy, we have a really well-educated group, more than half of an advanced degree. I haven't had that result before. So congratulations to all of you for that. That's fantastic. So a lot of you belong to a peer group too, and at least a couple of you have a coach, which is fantastic too. So. Okay, I would like to move on, but it's not responding. No, nothing's happening. Oh, there we go. How about that? Okay, sorry about this, folks. It worked perfect in rehearsal. Anyway, the 6th habit is develop board relations. So it's critical to get to know your board a little bit. Boards are more involved in the CFO search since Sarbanes-Oxley, which, really is going back a little bit. But before Sarbanes-Oxley, boards didn't necessarily always interview CFOs. And now they're required to, for public companies, they have to vet CFOs. And it's just a best practice, even if you're not required to by law. A lot of nonprofits do it, and even small companies as well. So it's the fiduciary duty of the board of directors is increased. When I was young, we actually had a company. It was called a FISC. I don't know if they still exist. I suspect everybody on this call would know better than I. But it was basically a company that, in my terms, just existed on paper, but we were able to shelter 15, 20-thirds of our international profit in this FISC. And that 15, 20-thirds was tax exempt from US income tax. So it's a great incentive for companies to sell globally, because 2/3 of your profit almost would be exempt from US income tax. So it was fantastic. One of the requirements was that you would have a board of directors meeting in the US Virgin Islands. In our case, it happened to be St. Thomas. So I live in Boston, Massachusetts. And it was interesting because we would have board of directors meeting in St. Thomas and we'd get 100% attendance. And yet we'd have a board meeting in Boston in February and we couldn't get anyone to come. So board meetings in the old days were a bit of a boondoggle, kind of a glorious time actually, but it's no longer the case now. Boondoggles are very serious, very important businesses conducted at board meetings, unlike in the older days. So audit committee also needs to understand the financial implications of major transactions. And candidly, there is no way they can do that without a good relationship with the chief financial officer. A lot of transactions are just gigantic. And there's no practical way. I've done deals that are 300-400 pages, and there's no way that an audit committee member is going to sit down and read it cover to cover. So he or she is really dependent upon the expertise of a CFO to make sure that all of the rules are being followed properly and that they're accounting for revenue recognition correctly and that sort of thing. So they really should be excited to get to know you a little bit as well. What I recommend is meet one-on-one with board members on an ongoing basis. Now, there are companies with 50, 60, even more board members. There aren't many, but they're out there. Obviously, if you're at one of those companies, this might be a little bit difficult to achieve. But, if you're with a company that has a more manageable number, if there are 12 outside board members, that's just once a month. You got to be able to do that. Meet them over, if you live in the same city and, once COVID's gone, play golf with them, meet them for coffee or beer or lunch or whatever. Until then, meet them over Zoom. It's no real excuse not to meet with them regularly, and they should be enthusiastic to meet with you. But it's important to be one-on-one so that you can be candid on both sides. And then I learned this lesson the hard way: no surprises at board meetings. So my very first board meeting, I put together a board package. It was probably the greatest package in the history of board packages. Absolutely fantastic. However, I didn't give it to them until the day before the board meeting, so they had no time to review it. So I spent the board meeting getting yelled at for what idiot I was for not sharing with them in advance, rather than how good the package was. So learn from my era. Don't allow that to happen to you. Make sure that you get your board package out there several days in advance so that your board members have a chance to go through it and ask you relevant questions and be prepared for an important conversation at the board meeting. So again, a lot of this comes back to trust. The CFO is the most trusted person within an organization, and the CFO is dependent upon the competence and integrity of its CFO. Okay, so the seventh habit is to perform cross-functionally. And when you think about it, I put these into high school, undergraduate, and grad school. But high school CFO focused just on finance and accounting. And that's kind of the way it was in the 1960s and 1970s. The CFO often maybe got the job because he or she was the best accountant in the company, not because they were a strategic thinker or they had a cross-functional view. And then it migrated. Eventually, CFOs took on more administrative type of responsibilities, including human resources, IT. A lot of them serve as their de facto in-house counsel. They're in charge of facilities and investor relations. Important roles, but all administrative. And now, so with a master's degree, they are involved in sales, marketing, strategy, and operations. And in fact, a lot of them, what they've learned is that they are better in that role to some degree than people who actually are in the role. A lot of them have told me, and they didn't say this in a bragging type of manner, but what they did say was that they found out when they went on a sales call, they were able to close the business more quickly than a lot of other people were, and than professional salespeople were. And the reason is trust. people, hear from the CFO and they basically believe everything she or he says. If it comes out of the words come from the mouth of a CFO, it's probably true. And use that in a way to your advantage. People are naturally inclined to trust you because of your integrity. So use that on sales calls, use that when you're talking to investors and other people. So the other thing is, it's just flattering to a customer when a CFO takes time out of his or her schedule to go on a sales call. Hey, we must be an important person in this company. The CFO is on the sales call. So keep in mind, a CFO is an organization's secret weapon. I think you're going to find you're going to be the best selling, best recruiting, best at closing deals, and best at fundraising because you do bring a lot to the table, and people really appreciate the skill set. And the 8th habit of elite CFOs, or Rockstar CFOs as I call them, is maintain financial expertise. This may seem obvious, but the modern CFO is strategic and they're cross-functional, and it is difficult to do both of those things while maintaining your status as a financial expert. So the prime directive of CFOs, and I threw that in case there are any Star Trek fans on the call, but the prime directive of CFOs remains to produce accurate and timely financial statements. So that's probably never going to change. And there's a guy I've known for some time, not a bad guy, but he was a tech company, and they had like genuinely massive revenue restatements, some of the biggest in history, in Massachusetts history, as a matter of fact. And his defense to this was he told people, I'm a strategic CFO. And by that, he meant that he wasn't responsible for producing accurate financial statements because he was a strategic CFO. He couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, it was just crazy. I can't imagine the SEC lawyers were like salivating when he said this, apparently right in front of them. They're like, boy, we get a live one here. But he literally did not think that he had to produce accurate financial statements because he brought strategic value to the company. So don't make that mistake. That was kind of naive. I had a boss who said GAAP is crap to me many times. He was not a financial person, he was a CEO. And he may have been right, but the fact is generally accepted accounting principles are the law of the land, and you need to keep some mastery over them. His point was, like, when I would present financial statements, he gave me an example. It was a customer that we had to defer revenue over the length of an agreement. And, I said, so we have to take it, over monthly over 3 years. So he was like, okay, did we ship it? Yes. Did the customer have it? Yes. Did they like it? Yes. Is it installed? Yes. Can they return it? No. He's like, okay, then it's revenue. Technically it wasn't, but on the other hand, he wasn't really wrong either. I mean, he had a valid point, right? I mean, in what world is that not revenue if all of those things were satisfied? But nonetheless, it wasn't, according to generally accepted accounting principles, which drove him nuts. So I encourage people to use KPIs, or key performance indicators, certainly whenever you're addressing a non-financial audience, and even sometimes when you're addressing a financial audience. GAAP is very useful, but sometimes a rules-based system has limitations that you don't want to rely on when you're telling the story. And the fact is, as a CFO or any executive, you're really a storyteller. So I never forget, F is for financial, and that's good enough for me. That's the Cookie Monster, for those of you who grew up watching Sesame Street, or who have kids that do. Anyway, our final habit is to achieve work-life balance as best you can. And this is really critical, and it surprised me a little bit because I tend to think of CFOs as borderline workaholics. They seem to work quite a bit, phenomenal work ethic, just driven to get things done. But virtually all of them told me about the importance of work-life balance and how it actually made them a better CFO. So there's a lot of research on it. You can take my word for it, you can look it up, but workaholics are not the best long-term performers. They are the best short-term performers. I mean, chances are, particularly since I'm talking to a lot of tax people, there's going to be a point in your career that you're going to have to work 70, 80, even more hours per week, give up weekends and holidays and that sort of thing. And, as a professional, you do what you have to do, but it's stupid in the long run to live your life that way. You'll burn yourself out, you'll be less productive. So Another thing, physical exercise is a very key indicator of success. Most successful executives actually do find time to work out pretty regularly. It gives them energy, it gives them health. It's critical in the long term that you exercise and maintain healthy and also follow a good diet as well. I'm not surprised, but that CFOs read quite a bit, but I was surprised. I figured they probably read mostly business books, but in point of fact, they don't read that many business books at all. They read a lot of fiction, a lot of biography, a lot of history, business books for sure, a lot of self-improvement and stuff. So make time to read. A friend of mine challenged me a couple of years ago. He said, just read 12 books a year. That's only one a month. They don't have to be the most, thick books. You don't have to read War and Peace or anything like that, but make it a point to be really well-read and, read some business books. Just a little funny story. I was early Amazon I was on, and they would recommend books for you based upon your habits. And for some reason, and you can actually look this up, it is a book, they recommended, every time I logged on Amazon, they recommended the autobiography of Vanna White. And if you don't know who Vanna White is, she is the woman, probably about my age, who spins the wheels on Wheel of Fortune. Apparently, she wrote an autobiography, and for some reason, Jeff Bezos thought that would make fine reading for me. I'm not sure what Amazon knew about me to make them think that that would be something I'd be interested in reading, but nonetheless, they thought that for about a year that I should pick up that book. Never did. So anyway, the key takeaway here is make time for family, friends, hobbies, vacation, community service, and whatever else it is that makes you happy. You can't be all about work. And if you won't do it for your company, do it for your family, because, it's such a critical thing, and your company will be better off for it, your family will be better off for it, and you'll be better off for it too. Don't skip vacations. Again, I know there's legitimate emergencies that come up that may make you forego a vacation, but if that happens 2 or 3 years in a row, you're doing something wrong. So, rethink it a little bit. So it's challenging in the short term, but it's imperative in the long term that executives find room for non-work activities. So, make the time to do all of these things. And I believe this is our final polling question. Okay, that's encouraging. Well, actually not that great, but about a third of you find time for regular exercise. And a little bit more than that do spend time with friends and family. So that's great. Only one person said that he or she does not do any of those things. So try to find a little time. I know career is busy, probably this year more so than ever. But long term, you'll want to find time for those things. So. Okay, and this is the final slide, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A after this. But there are some things you can do to become a rockstar CFO. And again, that was the focus of my book and my own expertise. But if you're not a finance and accounting executive, I think with a little tweaking and imagination, you can apply this to whatever career path you're on. The main thing is walk the floor, which, admittedly is an outdated expression. But by that, I mean, get out from behind your desk, understand the business, work, go on sales visits, get to talk to the engineers who design your product, that kind of thing. There was an interesting movie that came out a few years ago. It's called The Intern. It was, if you haven't seen it, good movie. It was Anne Hathaway and Robert De Niro. And Anne Hathaway played the founder of an internet startup. It was a retailer. Her character was named Jules. And to prepare for the role, Anne actually shadowed a real life CEO who, had done something similar, started an online retailer and became very successful. And one of the things that the character did, in fact, I think it was the opening scene in the movie, is Jules was actually on the customer support line. They sold dresses or something like that. And they're like bridesmaids' dresses. So Jules was actually the president of the company, very important job. But what Anne Hathaway learned is that this real life CEO spent 4 hours a week, no matter how busy she was, talking to customers. So you should do something like that. I mean, if you work for NASA or something, you might not want to, but if you work for a company where you can talk to customers, take the opportunity to do so. There's no better way to learn the business. Join a peer group. You're on a call of, probably the best tax peer group in the world. So if you're not all a member, become a member. Just impressed with the networking and the programming that this organization has to offer. And you will become so much better at your job just by developing these types of relationships and the education that comes with it. So establish a code of ethics. This is something you can do. It sounds like most of you do have one, but if you don't, maybe do. And if you do have one, maybe take a look at it. A lot of times it can just be buzzwords, but make sure that it actually applies to your business and has teeth and meaning, and that it's something that your employees and your customers and investors can get excited about. It can be overstated. Enron famously did have a code of ethics, and it was actually pretty well written. But beyond just establishing the code of ethics, make sure that your people know all about it and can follow it. And then hire a Rockstar Chief Accounting Officer and Controller. That's imperative. You don't want to make a lot of mistakes in that area, and the right person will allow you to get involved in all the strategic stuff. Let's keep in touch. Yes, both of those pictures are mine, even the guy on the left. My wife teased me. She said I'd look a lot tougher if I wasn't holding a bottle of Dasani water in my hand when the picture was taken, but nonetheless, that's my contact information. The easiest way to reach me is through text. If you do want to copy my book, it's rockstarcfos.com/ebook. That will get you a free copy. So just go on, and there's no password or anything like that I know of. So that said, that's the end of my presentation. So why don't we turn it over to Q&A?
Thanks so much, Jack. That was awesome. If anybody has Q&A, just drop it into the chat feature or into the Q&A section, and we can get some answers for you.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for putting up with the technical difficulties. You'd think with a master's degree from MIT, I would be above that sort of thing, but
we're all still kind of learning it, right, Jack? I mean, this is the new normal, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been on a million of these, but never have I gone into presentation mode. It's like, oh, that looks different than I expected. Oh, well, it happens. Are there no questions?
Not yet. Nothing coming in at this point.
Okay, so to meet the time requirements, and I think we're just about at the ceiling anyway, right?
Yep. Yep, we're right there. So
I actually cut out a lot of I actually have the history of the CFO, how it's gone from it's from like an accountant in the 1960s and 70s to a strategic thinker. So, but it's sort of interesting, but we won't have time for that. So,
gotcha. All right, it looks like we've got one that just came in. Do you have any names you can give us of a good example of a Rockstar CFO that we might have heard of?
I'm trying to. The person I once identified as the best CFO in the country was Sarah Fryer. She was the CFO of Square. And what impressed me is her strategic and technology vision. She became she actually was one of the first people to understand blockchain who didn't work for a blockchain company. She saw that the competitive advantage that it would give Square, because their technology is challenging, I suppose, but a lot of people can come up with a similar solution. So she actually said, hey, blockchain is what's going to give us a long-term competitive advantage. That came from her. She's now actually the CFO of a company called Nextdoor, which is it's maybe the most valuable private company in the country. It recently achieved unicorn status. It's a social media company. It's like Facebook, but it's all within your neighborhood. So she's done really well. So
very cool.
I'm trying to think. let's see. Well, she's one I think would be good to emulate. She's probably the best.
Okay. Okay. And then what's your answer to poll question number 3? And I just looked that up. So what is the most important part of leading a team? Recruiting, retention, motivating, leading, or other?
In my opinion?
Yeah, in your opinion.
Yeah, I would say leading, which is sort of vague, but especially now, right? Your leadership skills are going to be tested as never before because, people are really nervous even 6 months into this. And yeah, we've adjusted, but, back in March, April, we kind of thought by Labor Day things would be back to normal. That was wrong.
Right.
So, leadership requires everything, continuous communication, just making sure that the team is focused and happy, and it's not that hard. Like there are only 28 people in my company, but I've been able to communicate with every one of them pretty regularly, particularly in the early days, because small company, but a lot of stories there. We had a couple of people that were single, they lived alone, and I'd call them just to make sure that they weren't going nuts, right? I mean, I have a family at home, at least, with people to talk to, but early quarantine, they weren't supposed to leave the house at all. So I'm just checking, hey, you're keeping your sanity, that type of thing. But, I'm in a situation, I'm a father of 2 special needs kids, so I've got unique challenges. I know one of my coworkers is a single mom. Another one is taking care of her dad. He lives at home. Small company, but we've got a lot of unique challenges. So just, I think, communicating and reaching out with the team, letting them know that they're important and keeping them motivated and candidly trusting them. You hired great people, let them do their jobs and trust them that they will.
Very good. Very good. All right. I think there was one more that also came in. Any advice for a CFO who works for a CEO who is not open to new ideas or changes?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Like a year ago, I would have said start a search. But, it depends on how not open the person is. The guy that I worked for, I mentioned the Gap is crap guy, he was a tough nut to crack because it literally took me years for him to understand the strategic value that a good CFO could bring. So, if your circumstances are such that you have to stay there, try to understand what it is about this person that he doesn't, he's not open to changes. There could be a reason. A lot of times people like that candidly are insecure about their own position. I don't want to judge this particular case, but a lot of times when I found people are resistant to change, it's because change is bad for them. They like things the way they are. I did this in 1988 and it was good enough then, so it's going to be good enough now. So it's a tough mindset to overcome, but in a robust economy, I'd normally say, just find a new position. I realize that might come off as a little bit tone deaf today, but if you can, go for it. So.